Tonight's short talk is on James 1:18. And I'll read it, and then I'm going to talk about it. Of his own will, he gave birth to us by the word of truth, that we might be a kind of firstfruits of his creatures. Now, the key point I'm looking at, I've been assigned, is the first fruits concept. First fruits, and just like firstborn, are Old Testament words that describe the type of sacrifice people had to give. The firstborn came from flocks and herds. The first fruits came from what grew of the ground. You shall bring my choice first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God. And so they had to bring the choice first fruits. If the first few apples, one of them was bad, you don't bring that. So it's really the best of the first, the best of the best. That's what God deserves. Same with the firstborn. So back in James 18, there's a connection here with 18 and verse 15. And it has to be noticed. Starting in verse 14, we are drawn away by our desires. And these desires give birth to sin, and that when they grow up, they bring forth death, or give birth to death. The second, give birth to death, is the one of only two places in the entire New Testament where this particular word is chosen, and James used it in verse 18 and 15 to kind of draw it together so you'd make a connection. We kind of lose that sometimes with English, but it would have connected it very boldly. And so the point is that our desires are going to end up giving birth to death. But God's own will, as opposed to a lustful, intemperate desire, God had a will, a planned will, that involved birthing us, giving birth to us by his word of truth, so that we could be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Now, the first fruits refers to the best part of a certain whole. You know, if the first fruits of shoes would be the best shoes, okay, you're not talking about everything. So it's used in a number of ways like that. It also has, just like firstborn, it has a time aspect. It has to be first, but it also has a quality aspect. They're not always the same in every verse this occurs. Sometimes it's almost exclusively by time or order, but other times it's simply quality. For example, Genesis 4:4, Abel brought the firstborn. And that was the first thing that was born to him. But God said in Exodus 4:22 that Israel is his son, his firstborn. Now, that wasn't the first nation God made, but it was equivalent to his son, the most valuable of nations. So there we have a quality emphasis. In 1 Corinthians 16:15, Paul mentioned the household of Stephanas, the first fruits of Achaia. So of all the Christians that would eventually be converted in Achaia, that household or church, perhaps, was the first of it. That was the first. In Revelation 14:4, where John was writing about the 144,000, he said, "These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits to God and of the Lamb." And so, of the human race, of mankind, these were the first fruits, these 144,000. In 1 Corinthians 15, Christ is risen from the dead and became the first fruits of those who had fallen asleep or had died. So here the first fruits is the best of those who had died. Jesus has risen, and it's a guarantee that we shall rise. But he's the first fruits of the dead. He's the first product of that whole crop, and he should be first. And so here, the first fruits of creation, or his creatures, again, the totality here that we're the first fruits of may be everything. kind of like a Romans 8 concept, where all things kind of groan and labor and travail and are suffering until the consummation of all things. And so of all creation, both humans, animals, and perhaps even inanimate objects, it's perhaps, we are the first fruits of everything he's done. So we're supposed to be the best of everything, of all that's God's, because we're God's, and we have to be the best. And so it makes me ponder, are we acting that way? Can people tell that we're the first fruits, the best of humanity? I'll tell you, it's gotten easier lately, so we should be able to say yes. There may have been times in the deep past of the roots of this country where a lot of people acted okay, and hard to stick out. You really had to work hard. You don't have to even try hard anymore. So we ought to really be sticking out. We ought to be really lights. We ought to really have a message that is heard, because we are the first fruits, the best of what God's got now. And the way you become that way is that you're born by the word of truth. And so this word teaches us how to be born, teaches us that we have to listen to what the message says that's preached to us, and we have to respond. We have to respond and become part of God's first fruits if we want to be part of Jesus, the first fruit in the resurrection. We have to do that. It's easy to drag your feet on this. When I was passing through Alabama, near University of Alabama, and I stopped in at a church there, and the elder had a sermon at Bible class. He's a retired detective, and he told a story about a woman that he'd gone to church with where her son had just constantly resisted the message preached. It just went on and on. And so he said that he asked to borrow the car to go to the store, which was like a Quickie Mart 3 blocks away. After 5 minutes, she heard sirens, and she just had a sick feeling. She just knew the timing was scary. And so she raced over there just in time to get in the ambulance with him. And she said all that he said on the way to the hospital was, "I want to get baptized. I want to get baptized. And I want to get baptized." And he didn't live to get to the hospital. And so we got to think about how serious our chances are. God's not going to, he's guaranteed no one an existence to the point where we're going to finally get around to it because we've got nothing better to do. No, that's not good enough. To be first fruits, we have to be willing to be a part of God's best of the best, the special forces of God's humans. That's what we are. And in eternity, we're the only ones he's going to keep. The first fruits were brought into his house, and we are the household of God. And we have to be brought into that so we might live with him forever.